Welcome to the Second Half Stewardship podcast. We believe that God owns it all, and our response as Christians is to live generous lives. I'm Spencer Hall, a certified financial planner.
And I am Austin McLaughlin. As former full-time missionaries in the United States and overseas, Spencer and I approach managing our personal finances through the lens of biblical stewardship.
Journey with us as we explore how to be generous stewards of our money, time, relationships, gifts, and experiences.
Welcome back to Second Half Stewardship. We're so glad again that you are here. I think I realize I say that every time that we start, but we really are glad that you decide to take these 20 minutes, 30 minutes and listen to us. We hope that it has been encouraging to you thus far to hear about just how Spencer and I are wrestling with this idea that God owns it all, that we are his stewards. And I think it's been really formative for me as we've thought about these things, as we've prepared. So I really hope that it's been the same for y'all as you're listening in.
So, and we're making our kids listen to this as well. So, at least there'll be a couple listens, a couple listeners every time. Our wives as well. I think they may listen every now and then. Maybe. So we'll see.
They want to, at least. That's what right. I've been told.
That's right.
We're finishing out this portion of the podcast where we're talking about the uses of money.
Yeah.
The live, give, owe, grow framework that we've talked about that comes from Ron Blue and Kingdom Advisors and has been really formative as we think about how can we use our money. We can use it to live, we can use it to give, owe debt, owe taxes. And now we're going to think about grow, the savings piece of this. And really the linchpin question behind the grow piece is how much is enough? And that question bleeds over to every other category.
Right.
But I think it's really profound in the grow category. And it's not just how much is enough for me, but it's how much is enough for my family, for any future generations that I want to pass on. It's a really big question that I think, honestly, it comes back to one that we get very frequently when clients come to us is they want to know how much is enough? How much do I need to live? How much do I need to retire? All these big questions, because I think it produces a lot of fear when we don't know, do I have enough? Am I going to be okay?
Right.
So Spencer, in that line of how much is enough, grow, what's kind of what are the waters that we're swimming in with money and savings?
Well, if you've listened to the podcast before, we've talked about how the biggest fear as Americans that a lot of people have is running out of money.
Yeah.
People fear that in retirement more than death.
Yeah.
So if our whole goal is to have self-sufficiency, never to need to go to a neighbor, go to a friend, go to a son or daughter and confess, okay, I've run out of resources, then there is a level of anxiety there that really pushes us forward. Now, the flip side of that is that the Bible does say that we need to provide for our families.
Right.
And so we want to bear in that tension there. But when we come back to how much is enough, there are plenty of folks who are out there who look at this and say, well, I'm just going to save as much as I can for as long as I can, and we'll see where we go in the end. Yeah. And what we want to step back and do is put this again before the Lord and say, how much is enough? Lord, what would you have me do with these funds?
Right.
Because at some point, if you're a Christian, you believe Jesus is coming back.
Yeah.
We don't want to have tons of resources that we've never deployed.
No.
We want to be wise stewards and looking at providing maybe just enough for the next season.
Right.
And that's a difficult balance, and there are thoughts that we have about that, but there are fewer rules, fewer things that we can say with certainty in every situation. But we do want to have hearts again that go before the Lord and listen to the Holy Spirit.
Right. And I think, again, just like we talked about with taxes, like we talked about with debt, there's always going to be this posture of, well, what should I do? And what posture do I need to have towards the Lord? And I think the posturing here is that God owns it all. I mean, that we come back to that often, but we need to trust the Lord. I think about the Lord's Prayer. Give us this day our daily bread. And I can still save and be diligent about saving.
Right.
But I don't need to think about, okay, how much, give me tomorrow's daily bread plus next year plus the next 10 years.
Right.
And always be anxious about it.
Right.
Oftentimes Jesus will say, don't be anxious. I am God. I will provide for you. And I think the difference between saving out of anxiety and saving out of fear versus saying, God, I want you to provide for me. And I want to be wise with how you've provided for me.
Right.
And so I don't just want to build a bigger barn
Right.
in hopes that I'll have more later in life.
Right.
But I also don't want to just be like, well, I can spend it all and live
Right.
this lavish lifestyle. We've seen the challenge there too.
Right.
So we can't live on either of those poles, but it's a matter of trusting God for my daily bread, for my future daily bread,
Right.
but not feeling like I've got to just grab.
Sure. Absolutely. It is really interesting when we think about our culture and how we lionize the self-made man, self-made woman. And we see that wealth accumulation get to a point where really from a need standpoint, they're almost at a point where we could say they don't need to trust in God for their daily bread.
Yeah.
There's enough in their barns, so to speak. If we're thinking about with spiritually attuned ears, though, when we listen to someone and what they say about that, typically it is mostly about them. It's not about God.
Right.
And we just don't want to get to that point.
No.
So what we find, I think, in the biblical teaching, and particularly Jesus' teaching in Luke 12, is something that's a far different perspective and maybe doesn't get enough play in American Christianity.
Yeah.
Because I think we come back oftentimes to this concept that, well, the Proverbs tell us that working hard is good, saving is good, that I need to think about the future, I need to be diligent and wise. And there is some wisdom in that.
Totally.
But we can take that and make that our idol.
Yeah.
And Jesus pulls us back here and says, oh, God owns it all.
Yeah.
Let's come back to that idea.
Yeah.
God has our lives. So as we look at Luke 12, verses 13 through 21, again, Jesus is, Luke 9, he has set his face to Jerusalem. He's teaching the disciples on the way. He's starting to unveil some more difficult teachings because he's preparing them for the fact that he's going to the cross. And he's starting to openly talk about the difficulties of discipleship and of following him. And he's reframing an entire worldview for them. And that's where we find ourselves in Luke 12. So I'll read the passage and then Austin will dive into some of your thoughts thereafter. Okay. But Luke 12, starting with verse 13, someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But Jesus said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbiter over you?" And he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.'"
Even as you were reading that, there are several things that just stuck out to me. This idea that we looked at from Ecclesiastes 2, and the preacher who said, "Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die." And he had pursued all the wealth in the world and was despairing.
Right.
And in contrast, this person has laid up all the ample goods for himself. And his heart has gotten cold towards God. And just how often and how easy it is when we get to that place of self-sufficiency to then say, I'm good, I've done it. I have won the game of life.
Yeah.
And we forget about God in that place.
Yeah.
And, I think about, I worked with international students here at the University of Tennessee for a little bit. And I'll never forget a conversation I had with a student from Haiti who lived through the earthquake, and a student who was from Ethiopia who had lost both of his parents at a young age and was raised by his grandmother. And both Christians before they came, and both lived in a place of poverty. And they were saying it was easier in our home country to walk with Jesus. They had both been kind of adopted by American families, and the American families provided for them in really beautiful ways. But they said, as we stopped having to trust God every day for our needs, then it got harder it just became harder to be a Christian. And it struck me because I was like, I live in America, and I've never known life where my daily needs, I'm praying to the Lord, hey, will I have food today? I don't know, but I need you to provide. And it just strikes me that the further we get down this path of self-sufficiency and providing for myself, the further I get away from trusting Jesus. And I think that's what we see in this person. And verse 19, and I will say to my soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. It's just that posture of like, I have done it. I've gotten there. He had saved. He had saved in biblical principles and in biblical ways. And honestly, if we look at our churches, they would have commended this person. Like, hey, you did really well with your money. You don't have to worry about somebody else providing for you. But his soul was at stake.
Right.
And that's really challenging as I think about this.
Right. And that's particularly challenging. We help people plan for the future financially. We help them plan for retirement.
Yeah.
So maybe this guy overdoes it a little bit, but one could argue that his planning here is not too different in some ways from planning for retirement.
Yeah.
As kind of the good life in American culture oftentimes envisions retirement, which is going out on the golf course every day and having a life of ease and going out, and there are beautiful things about having more space, being able to serve others, having time for recreation, having more space so that you're not, grinding it out at work in maybe the same way. So there are aspects of a season of transition that are very biblical and good.
Yeah.
But we also have to recognize that God doesn't say, oh, you're a little bit off, or, let me redirect you here. He says, fool.
Yeah.
He uses a very strong word here.
Yeah.
He says your investment is completely off here. It's a stupid investment.
Yeah.
So, and there's a number of reasons for this that we'll dive into. Other thoughts that you have on this passage, Austin?
Yeah, as you were saying that, the Ron Blue comes back to this question of retirement, and he says, what are you retiring to?
Right.
And I think that's a profound question as you think about savings as well, and not just saying, I'm going to store up for myself so I can do more of what I want to do.
Right.
But it's what am I moving towards in that season?
Right.
And I think that's maybe in some ways where this person they got it wrong. It's this, Jesus says, this night your soul is required of you.
Right.
It's obvious that he's gone astray. The things that you have prepared, whose will those be? Like, you're going to die.
Right. Right.
Whose is it?
Right.
And it's just, yeah. And Jesus finishes, so is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.
Right.
It's that posturing towards, well, I don't think Jesus is necessarily calling out saving here, but he's saying, you have gotten so self-sufficient, you have forgotten me, and you've been poor towards God.
Right.
You have not been generous towards God.
Right.
And I think that's the other turn too, is like, yeah, what is it about saving that we can still be a generous steward? We can still be a generous giver and not remove that trust in the Lord.
Right. Right. Well, and we want to talk about some practical difficulties of saving more than we need.
Yeah.
As financial advisors, we are almost heretics probably for suggesting that people can save too much, but that's what we'll come back to it sometimes. Now, sometimes we say, okay, actually, you need to save more.
Yeah.
If your goals are A, B, and C, that the path that you're on is not going to get you there. But sometimes we see the other side,
right?
That the amount of saving is actually preventing being generous givers or
Absolutely.
in doing some of the things in the present time that would be redemptive.
Right.
So one of the things that we come back to is working hard to be able to save as much. If we're over saving, can harm our relationships with God and those around us.
Yeah.
If I take a job that is very, very demanding, that doesn't allow me to engage with other believers, with my family, it frays relationships just so I can max out that 401k or do the savings or whatever my goal is particularly there. That can be a significant detriment.
Right.
I think of a friend, who during his working years, he worked an extra job so that he would be able to save more because he had these goals in retirement that he wanted to achieve. And sadly enough, when retirement came, he ended up getting sick. And what came out was that his relationships with his sons had been frayed by the pace that he had gone. So he passes on all these resources to his sons who don't share his core values. And then those resources, my observation was, took him even farther away from God.
Yeah.
So it was all the way around. It was building bigger barns. It was allowing those to fray relationships, and then even passing on the resources, continue to take those relationships in a worse direction.
Right.
So one of those things, again, it can fray relationships in a moment. Another part is it can limit our capacity to give generously in the moment. You want to talk about that some?
Yeah. Well, and I think about, if I am taking so much money and putting it away either towards retirement or saving for a vacation or this thing that I want to do, then I have no money to give. And if an opportunity comes where I can give to a brother or sister in need, or I can give charitably to a cause, if I have already taken it out of my hands and put it in something where I can't take it out, then it limits my capacity to give. I just don't have the money anymore.
Right.
And it's hampering my soul.
Right.
Because as we've seen, the more you have, the more you want. By and large, I think there's really wise people that have capped lifestyle that can do this well. But I think the majority of us, there's always a chase for more.
Right.
There are those studies that have been done that said when you ask someone how much do they need, it's always 15% more.
Right.
And so if I always need 15% more, then I'm always chasing 15% more. So then I need to save for 15% better retirement.
Right.
Well, I'm never going to get there.
Right.
And then I'm never going to give abundantly to the Lord because I'm always looking for the next thing to put money away for.
Right.
And
that comes back to that point that we made about giving breaking the power of money.
Yeah.
We've really got to acknowledge that when we don't oversave, when we give ourselves the flexibility to give more, it does break the power of money in so many ways.
Yeah.
And that kind of segues into another thought here. Oversaving or saving as this man did just for bigger barns, it pulls our focus and hearts to our savings more quickly. And this kind of is right in line here. But, I distinctly remember a conversation with a client over the past year where a client said, well, I've noticed that I'm paying attention to my account a lot more than I did a number of years ago. Because a number of years ago, I didn't have much. Now I've got a lot more.
Right.
And that's true for all of us.
Yeah.
When we have more in a certain place, we're going to pay more attention to it.
Right.
So when, this client had just started out and was just starting to save, it's just like, okay, well, investments go up, they go down. That's still not a big impact. But now, here we are many years into the future. The zeros, start to add up and start to weigh on us in a different way.
Right.
So it can pull our focus because where our money is, there our heart is as well.
Absolutely.
If I have more funds in a flexible place where I can give, and they are being distributed to those in need, to those brothers and sisters who I can benefit in some way, then my heart is there. Yeah. Another point that kind of goes along with this, it requires more of our time.
It does.
If I save more, if I have bigger barns, I have to protect those barns. I need to install the cameras around those barns so somebody can't invade those barns. One of the simple ways, sometimes we'll see clients that, will want to get into real estate, and that's fine. They could buy a home they might use for a rental home, or a cabin that they could get to that they might rent as well, or they might do that a couple of times.
Right.
But there's still more time that is required.
Yes.
And most of the time, a few years down the road, the client says, this isn't quite working out in the same way that I was hoping, because it's requiring a lot more of my time. Because it's pulling them away from some of those things maybe initially that they had hoped for, which oftentimes would be peace and rest and, other things that might have been the initial hope.
Well, in that time, I think about all the students that I worked with over 10 years in ministry, and how frequently I heard stories of fractured relationships with fathers or fractured relationships with mothers because all they were doing is working.
Yeah.
And that was a very common thing that we heard from students was, I never see my parents because they're always working. Now, on the flip side, there was an honor that they bestowed. We always worked with either international students or students from a different culture who thoroughly honored their parents for that, but the relationship was always fractured. And I think when we think about, okay, I'm working hard to save, even if it is to pass on resources to the next generation, I'd rather have a current relationship with my children than a future relationship that's fractured and broken, but they've got my money.
Or they got to go to some Ivy League school, or have a doctoral degree that was paid for by you, or whatever it might be. Yeah, I'd much more desire the relationship with my kids, and they would too. A 5-year-old might not be able to articulate it in quite that way, but I've yet to meet a child that didn't want to have more time with mom and dad. To build a good relationship. Obviously, if the parent is engaged and really wants to spend that quality time there. The final one that I want to highlight here is that over-saving, building bigger barns, it can harm the future recipient.
Absolutely.
And that's something that we don't really grapple with, I don't think, enough, is not just how much is enough for me, maybe for my immediate family or, my season of life, but how much is enough to pass on?
Yeah.
Because for some of us, we just save and save and save, and we limit our lifestyle, and that's good in many ways. And we do give, and that's good in many ways. But maybe we save, to the point where we're just building this curve of resources upward and upward. And we don't really think how much is enough for the next generation. Is that next steward prepared for those resources? We think about the 18-year-old kid who receives $500,000 and say, well, surely that kid's not prepared for it, maybe if they don't have, a level of maturity and so forth. And that's an easy one. But my observation is there are so many of us, when we receive resources, that it starts to pull us away from God. We start to trust in those resources, even if it's a nice inheritance, but it's not, an amount that completely, changes life. It doesn't necessarily draw us closer to God.
No.
And so as we think about how much is enough for us, we also surface that for the next generation. And we really want to begin to think about what the Lord might lead, there.
And we'll definitely get to that in future episodes as well. This idea of how much is enough for the next generation. Is that steward prepared? Because it is a really important question. Because I think, Scripture does talk about leaving inheritance to kids, but I don't think it's always about wealth. I think the inheritance that Scripture often talks about is wisdom. Because you see generations where when David passes on wealth to Solomon, well, within one generation, it's going crazy. Like the kingdom is broken, the kingdom is divided. And there was a fractured relationship between David and some of his kids. And it led to some really nasty stuff. And so I think the inheritance that we want to leave is an inheritance of wisdom, of relationship, of care, of tenderness. Not just of money so they never have to work. I'm so thankful that my parents instilled in me proper work ethic and to be wise with resources, so that when I actually had resources, then I didn't just go crazy with them.
Right.
And I think that that's a kindness of the Lord as well, that he has allowed me to be in that place. But I think that's the place where we have to wrestle with how much is enough, how much is enough for the next generation. And if we don't wrestle with it, then our kids are going to wrestle with it.
Right.
And if we haven't prepared them, are they going to wrestle with it well?
Yeah, because an inheritance that is a monetary inheritance tends to just amplify the character issues that are already there.
Right.
And it can also lead to fracturing of the interpersonal relationships of the people that are receiving the inheritance, which is a whole nother ball of wax that we won't get into today. But it can create challenges, certainly in some significant ways. Yeah.
Well, I think there's the significance of the scriptures talking about our eternal inheritance is one that's pure and undefiled. And that's what we want to long for. In passing anything along, it's that the next generation takes it on and uses their resources, the wisdom that we pass on, the wealth that we pass on for kingdom purposes. That would be the ideal end state in all times.
Well, and as we think about how much is enough for me in this season, family in this season, how much is enough for the next generation, then we really get clarity that we've done our thought process and we've listened to the Lord on living. We've done so on growing resources. Now, owing, of course, if we can limit our debt and, of course, we'll pay our taxes, then that part is a little bit easier to go ahead and mark off as well. The plug is giving. And that allows us to really give at a much higher level if we can set some limits in terms of how much we want to set as how much is enough for us and how much is enough for that next generation. It frees us up to be incredibly generous in this season of life.
Absolutely.
And to just ask God for our daily bread, which is a great spot to be in.
It is. It is. So I'm going to read this quote from Tertullian, and we'll go ahead and close out here. I think this is really sweet. And so it is that when a man walks along a road, the lighter he travels, the happier he is. Equally, on this journey of life, a man is more blessed if he does not pant beneath a burden of riches. Simplicity is a beautiful thing. The riches are a burden. Riches they can weigh on us. But simplicity, being content, godliness with contentment is great gain.
Right. And so we see it in the early church among fathers like Tertullian, in 2nd century. We see it, of course, in Christ's command. We see it lived out today among the saints. So thanks again for joining us. As we shift this next session, it will be towards thinking again about God owning our time and how we can use our time in a way that honors him as stewards. And as we've talked about in the past, of course, time and money in many ways are interchangeable. So as we do a deeper dive on time in particular, we'll be thinking about how we can use those resources and time in a way that honors him.
All right. We'll see you next time.
This content was provided by Second Half Stewardship. We are in Knoxville, Tennessee, and you can visit our website at www.secondhalfstewardship.com. The information in this recording is intended for general educational and informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advisory, financial planning, legal, tax, or other professional advice based on your specific situation. Please consult your professional advisor before taking any action based on its contents.